Hello everybody, this is Manus and welcome back to another weekly metagame breakdown based on the mobalytics data dump. As usual, we're gonna look at the top 5 most popular decks of the last week or so, and of course at the top 5 highest win rate decks to see what is doing really well, besides maybe not being as popular as some other decks. Alright, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below to turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. And now let's dive right in. Alright, first thing to note is we now see something that is kind of a tendency in digital card games, because there are a lot of people playing them, playing a lot of games each day, making them the formats being solved a lot quicker, and it seems like we are kind of approaching that stage in Runeterra now. There seems to be a lot less change and a lot more like consistency and stability in the metagame from like dataset to dataset. This dataset, for example, is not diverging that much from like what we've seen in the last breakdown. If you want to like compare it and haven't seen the last one, maybe check it out to get like an idea of how things are evolving. Alanzq's ramp control was one of the most played decks last time around, and still is. I think last time it was second or third most played. Now it actually is the most played. Also keep in mind, this data only draws a picture of the past. It does not tell us much about how things are right now, because this data came out on Friday and includes games played up until the 27th in mastered by people using the mobalytics deck tracker. Anyway, so this deck is something that I personally haven't seen that much anymore on ladder in the last half week or week. So it is very possible that the deck is actually on a decline and kind of reached its peak with this data. Like 2,500 games is quite a lot for like the most played archetype, and it's curious. I'm curious to see what's gonna happen in the next data dump, how the numbers change, if it's just like my own perception or like kind of a variance of what I'm running into, or if the deck actually has fallen in popularity. This also happens to be the most popular version of Freljord Shadow Isles control, which is no surprise. It's the list by Alanzq, who has hit rank 1 EU, I think, more than once, like 2 or 3 times with this deck. Noteworthy is the most popular list, the most played list among the larger archetype, actually still has the She Who Wanders that he had initially. This is his more recent list where he replaced it with Ledros, which I think makes a lot of sense. It provides nice inevitability, is pretty great against other control decks, and plays well with the one atrocity that he has, and with like his Trindamirs and stuff, making the deck actually like kill you pretty quickly once it starts going for the kill. Another thing that is interesting and noteworthy here is that this specific deck actually has a slightly higher win rate than the overall archetype. The overall archetype of Freljord Shadow Isles control variants has a win rate of 54.9%, while this specific version with the She Who Wanders, but I don't think whether She Who Wanders or Ledros makes a big difference here. And if not, Ledros might increase the win rate a bit, but possibly not notably in the big picture over such a big sample size. But the win rate of this specific War Mother's control version actually is 56.85 over close to 400 games. So basically like almost a fifth of the whole data is coming from this specific list, and the rest of the data is coming from other variants of this list, or other like Shadow Isles, Freljord control approaches that are more different in a way. I'm not sure how wide they go with like similarities in decks when they lump them together, but it seems like there are other Shadow Isles, Freljord variants, control variants, that are worse than this and dragging down the overall win rate potentially. So that's definitely interesting and indicates that this particular list and archetype might actually be a bit better than the overall archetype data suggests, and it's nice to have this kind of comparison. All right, on to the next deck. Second most popular by now is Ezreal Combo. It has been rising through the ranks in terms of popularity. It was already quite popular last week, but I think last week it was in like 4th place or something. It was just kind of starting to become widely popular, and now it's like number 2 and not far behind the Shadow Isles Freljord control. So it also has the same win rate, 54.9% over the almost 2,300 games. There's not really a whole lot in terms of lists. Like the lists differ so little that yeah, I'm not surprised that there isn't a whole lot of variation. There's just not much room for innovation. Interestingly enough, this specific list has a win rate of 52% over 200-ish games, while the overall archetype has a win rate of basically 55%. Although the differences usually are something like the rummage is something else, like a true shot barrage or an entreat, or maybe they shave like an Avaros and Marksman and play like 2 Avaros and Sentry or something like this. They're just like very small differences, and I don't think they make up for a difference of like 3% in win rate. So it's probably just like variance and or like different pilots, since only 200 games or less than 10% of these games are played with this specific list. It just means that everyone has their like preferences for like those 1-2 flag slots and plays it differently, and maybe the guy that was playing this list wasn't as good at the archetype or wasn't running as hot. I don't think that whether you run a rummage or a true shot barrage or whether you run like an entreat or something makes up for like 3% win rate. So it probably is pretty marginal what you do in those slots. So keep that in mind, and I don't think that actually says a lot about the win rate. One thing that's noteworthy, by the way, is they don't have a way of identifying mirror matches because they don't get opponent deck data from Riot. They told me, I asked them, so this data is not purged for mirror matches. So especially very popular decks like War Mother Control, Ezreal, Elusives, that sort of stuff, will be impacted by mirror matches, because if they are very popular, that means you also run into mirrors quite a lot more. And if you add mirror match data to a deck with a winning record, it obviously brings down the win rate, because the mirror match is by definition pretty much 50-50. So if you add a whole bunch of like 50 data to something that's above 50%, you'll obviously bring down the win rate. While actually if a deck is having a losing record, the mirror match data is actually bringing up the win rate slightly. We don't know how much it impacts the win rate, but it's something to keep in mind, and means that these super popular decks might have an actually overall higher win rate against the field once you account for mirror matches. I would assume it's not like a lot. It might be it's probably between like 0 point something and 1%, if I had to guess, especially with these big sample sizes. I don't think there's like that huge of an impact, but it's very well possible that the win rate of these decks is notably over 55% rather than barely under. Anyway, on to deck number 3. Deck number 3 is still Kinkou Elusives. Here you see my latest version, which is basically one card different from 6.0's rank 1 version, and which is also like the most played version, which has 3 Will of Ionia and 1 Deny. But I think they're just like a fair share of matchups where the second Deny makes or breaks the matchup, while Will is just like a decent card to have, and 3 Will is not always that great. This is still very popular. It has gone slightly down. I think last time it was like in 2nd place. Also, the specific list that I mentioned that 6.0 has ran to rank 1 actually has a 2% higher win rate than the overall archetype, so it seems like there might be some worse versions running around that bring down the win rate. The most popular list, the 6-0 list, with specifically the 3 will, 1 deny, make up for like more than a third of the overall data. So seems like there are some variants that bringing down the win rate a bit, because the win rate of the archetype as a whole is like 61.2%, and the win rate of 6-0 specific list over like more than 750 games is actually 63.2 or something. So once again, we see a notable difference between the most popular version of a deck and the archetype as a whole. On to the next one. Here we have Gummi's and allnewbagel's Burn Aggro with everyone's favorite Teemo. This deck still very popular right now. 1885 games. Probably not righteously popular, because if we look at the win rate, that's the deck actually isn't doing that great. It's like 53.3% over such a big sample size, so it's really not doing that well. It includes multiple variants, of course, so there's a difference between variants. But even if we look at like different variants, the specific Teemo list that we see here on screen has like a win rate of 63.4% over like 134 games, so not that big of a sample size. Might be like running hot or like getting the right matchups, because these kind of decks can really tear through certain archetypes, while the champion list, 1 and 2 drop heavy list with a sample size of 121 games, has only a win rate of 59.5%. And then apparently there's also a whole lot of variations from these lists that somehow bring down the win rate quite a lot. But even Gummi, as Swim told me, by now doesn't like the deck and this build much anymore, and realized the deck doesn't really have very many like favorable matchups right now. So the deck will probably come down in popularity, because it doesn't seem to be doing very well as an archetype overall. But if you want to play Burn, the indication seems that this is a decent option, since over not that large of a sample size, but a reasonable sample size that gives us a solid amount of insight into how it's doing, the deck is doing pretty well. So if you like this type of deck, try this list. And try to not get too fancy, because then you might be one of those decks that actually bring down the overall archetype win rate and you're hurting yourself. And last but not least, we still have Fearsome in the top 5. It's only at the bottom of top 5, but not far behind number 3 and 4. Still, the most popular version is Unjust Charlie's list with 2 Redeemer, 2 Guardian, 2 Pursuit as a splash, and double Chronicler of Ruin. The overall win rate of the archetype is also still very solid. We're seeing something around like 57% over that sample size. Noteworthy is there are a lot of splash options like PNZ, for example. Some people are going back to Ionia and so on. So the overall archetype is also doing around like 57-58%. It seems like other splash options are actually doing better right now, like PNZ, and I think also Ionia have a bit higher of a win rate. So it might be time to move away from Demacia to, say, the PNZ splash, or back to Ionia to give that a try. This specific list, as I mentioned, like PNZ SI is doing better. This specific list that we are looking at here is actually not doing that great. Like the win rate over 370 games with this specific list is only 53.5%. So it seems like there are better Demacia splashes to consider here. since there's a discrepancy of like 3.5% win rate between this specific list and the archetype as a whole. And I don't think this lumps in like largely different Shadow Isles Demacia decks, but I'm not sure how far it goes, if it even like lumps in something like Swim's more recent Dawn Spiders deck variants and stuff. But it seems like 2 Radiant Guardian, 2 Pursuit, 2 Redeemer, and the 2 Chroniclers are not the ideal way to play Fearsome with Demacia anymore. So you might want to like look at other variants. Unfortunately, I obviously don't have data on other variants of the archetype, so I only always have the most popular list, and the most popular list actually here is doing notably worse than the archetype at large. Also, just a reminder, you can find both sheets with like the most popular list and the win rate, as well as the overall number of games and win rates, linked down below in the description as usual, if you want to check them out yourself, dive deeper, look at specific lists, build some of those lists in your client, and so on. Alright, so now we are on to the top 5 highest win rate decks, which is probably the most interesting part for a lot of people, because they're looking for the next deck to like climb ladder with, get to Masters, climb in Masters. So let's take a look. King of the Hill is actually surprisingly still Spiders. Last week it had over 63 point something percent, so it lost about 1% point. The most popular version, ironically, is this Flood Spiders list by Jones, that he actually himself doesn't really think is very good and didn't do very well with. And if we actually look at the data of like the most popular decks, the deck actually doesn't do that well. Like, the win rate of the archetype is over 62%. The win rate of this specific list is only 55% over like 56 games. The deck went largely down in popularity. Last week it was in the 4-figure popularity, and now it's only like 800 games. So the deck is definitely on the decline. It might have to some extent to do with this specific version. There also seems little agreement on versions, since the most popular version, over 800 games, has only 56 games played with this version, and is massively worse in terms of win rate than the archetype as a whole. But since it's such a small sample size, it's probably also not affecting the overall archetype win rate too much. But it still looks like Spiders is a real tier 1 deck potentially, and people need to figure out what the current best version looks like and start agreeing on a version, and then the deck might also become more popular again. If you want to try something different, give this a try. Otherwise, you might want to try and go back to a more traditional Elise, Darius, Spiders list and try to figure out what works there. I recommend my deck tech from a while ago. Most of the things I said in there still hold true. There might be some adjustments, like Arena Battlecaster is a great addition now, and just juggle around some stuff basically, and sort of work from there and try to evolve it and see what works. Alright, next we have Elusives. Elusives is still doing really well. It was, I think, in second place last week after Spiders, and still is, and the win rate has basically not changed. In general, it's notable that the win rate of decks has been very consistent mostly. Like Ezreal and I think the Warm Water Control deck were around 54.9% last time, especially Ezreal. I think Warm Water's Control actually gained a percent potentially. I think it was actually like 53.9 or something last week. But we're seeing a lot of stabilization in the win rates and popularities of decks, and now have like multiple thousands of games of a specific archetype over like more than 1 week to give us an idea of their overall win rate against the wider field and their popularity, which is pretty interesting, and what I meant earlier with the metagame starting to become solved. Once again, I just released a deck tech on this archetype, and actually learned from my testing that splashing Noxus or Demacia is probably making the deck better than splashing Freljord. So if you want to learn all about my testing with various splashes and my results, check out the deck tag. I'll be linking the Spiders deck tag during the Spiders section, and the Elusive deck tag, of course, here. So you can find them up here in the cards to check out. Then we have Fearsome again. As I said earlier, the highest win rate Fearsome list actually is the PNZ splash, which is a bit weird to me. Like, then again, I guess if Elusive is popular, it kind of makes sense, because I think the list is much, much better against Elusive. The matchup against Elusive normally, I would say, is unfavorable for Fearsome, but with a lot of spot removal from Mystic Shot and stuff, the matchup becomes a lot better, because you can just kind of like shoot down all the early Elusives and make it a lot harder for them to get into race mode, and then just kind of kill them before they race you with stuff like Hecarim in the mid game. I am not a big fan of splashing more than at most 6 cards, so I would recommend shaving something here to go down to 6 cards. Maybe cut a beam or get excited to get down to 6 cards. But yeah, this has been doing well last week, and it's still doing well or even better than last week. And Fearsome is still a real top deck, it seems. And it's also actually very popular if you count all the, if you add up the games of all the different variants. Like, it made it in rank 5 just with the Demacia variant, but if you add in the games from the PNZ variant, maybe like mono variants and Ionia variants, you easily end up in something like 3rd place of popularity, maybe even more. Let me check a second. For example, the PNZ SI alone are almost 800 games. So if you add those to the Demacia Shadow Isles Fearsome games, we actually end up in 1st place of popularity. So technically, all Shadow Isles Fearsome variants combined are still the most popular archetype before anything else, with like close to 3,000 games. Because once we already like once we also look at like Ionia Shadow Isles, we quickly end up with something like 3,000 games. Yeah, about 3,000 games, 2,800, 2,900 games. And then we also have like Freljord variants, so that actually brings us to like more than 3,000 games. So Fearsome still technically king of the hill, and still doing really well, making it into 3rd place here, and it seems like PNZ might be the splash to go for. Alright, on to the next one. Close behind is still the good old Heimerdinger Karma aggro control by wraptero. Nothing really changed. The specific list that is most popular right now for some reason actually has 1 Steel Tempest over the 3rd Deny, which is something I wouldn't recommend. wraptero wouldn't recommend, and Alanzq, who has been playing the deck a lot himself too, wouldn't recommend either. So just stick to this version. It's tried and true and has been serving good players really well. One thing that is noteworthy though is that the most popular list, even though I don't think the 1 Steel Tempest is making a relevant difference there, is actually doing even better than the archetype as a whole. So the overall win rate over 150 games of this like single Steel Tempest list is 65%, 65.3 to be exact. I don't think it has much to do with the Steel Tempest, but to be fair, 150 games is not that big of a sample size, so there might be some variance involved here, but it also indicates that the archetype is really good, and that there are still probably some worse lists running around, since I don't think the actual difference of this 1 card is doing this and everyone else is playing this. And if with over, I think, what is it, 800 games, this archetype having like 150 games only being the most popular list, actually it's 1,340 games, so 150 games is like slightly above 10% of the lists being this specific like Steel Tempest list, then there are probably the next most popular list I would guess is the one with 3 Deny, and then there are a whole lot of other versions running around, and it seems like the other versions are what brings down the win rate to only 58.2%. It's very possible that the archetype as a whole has a win rate closer to like 60 or even above 60%, making it actually potentially close in win rate to Elusives and a really good deck. So give it a try. The deck's actual win rate might be better if you play this specific list than if you play like some random lists that are out there. And I've been facing like versions with weird cards that are not this list myself, and I can only urge you to play this specific list, and then you'll do really well, and you might have one of the best performing decks in the format right now, surprisingly. Noteworthy though, if you see a lot of Ezreal, this might be a bit tricky. The Ezreal matchup can be a bit rough here, although the health potions, spirit refuges, and karmas help a bit there, and your like elusive aggression. And last but not least, we have the new kid on the block, Karma Lux Control, doing pretty well here, almost 58%, very close behind the other decks. This list is a bit weird. I think for standalone it runs too few units. I think you want like 9 3-drops for your standalone, not just 6, because it will just end up a lot of the time with like a standalone without a unit, and the deck also doesn't have that many proactive cards early on, especially if it doesn't have a unit, so you will just like fall behind on tempo a lot, and that's pretty bad for a deck that already starts from behind. A quick look at the stats for the most popular list. In this case, actually, in this case, actually, is 265 games for this specific list, and the win rate of this specific list actually being 62.2% over the win rate. So once again, an archetype that might be still in the process of people figuring out what the best version is, and the best versions doing notably better than the archetype as a whole. Although I am surprised that this specific list with so few units is still doing so well, especially against like the more aggressive decks. This just, you need to really high roll. And yeah, 265 games is still like a pretty solid sample size to give us an idea, and the archetype is still sort of in development. And in terms of popularity, the deck is just starting to become popular. It's a bit over 1,000 games, which is already pretty solid, so it makes it into like the top 10 most popular decks, and even into the top 5 win rate, which is also not surprising. It's one of the decks that Alanzq has been championing and doing well with. This is not his specific list, I think his list's a bit different. But yeah, he has climbed to Master or even rank 1 on an A, and been doing really well with it during his climb. So yeah, there you have it. Top 5 most popular decks haven't really changed a whole lot. We saw some change, like some shuffling around and some new introductions with Karma Lux in the highest win rate section. And I think we now, with the change to their sheets, showing actually like the stats of the most popular list on the second sheet, not the stats of the archetype as a whole, plus the most popular list, is pretty cool. So we get to compare the performance of the most popular list of an archetype with the archetype as a whole. So thanks again for mobalytics for doing all the work and putting out this great data. It's amazing for content creators like me to dive in and yeah, get a much better look at what the metagame looks like, what decks perform, and gives us much more objective data and insight into how archetypes do, especially for just comparing archetypes, even if there are factors that impact win rates of archetypes, such as player skill and so on. They affect all of these things, so the data is still fairly comparable from one deck to another. So even if the actual win rates of some of these decks are different, like higher than they turn out in the data, they are still pretty comparable among each other because most of them are affected by the same up and downsides. All right, that's going to be it again for this week's metagame breakdown. I'll be back next time, of course. And yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think, how you feel about this week's data and so on, and what you think about this sort of video and series and how I'm doing it. I'm open to feedback on constructive criticism and ideas for future content, of course. So yeah, that's it again. You know the drill. Hit the subscribe button on your way out, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. Leave a like if you enjoy it, share it with your friends, comment, turn off your ad block to help support content creators on YouTube. And yeah, that's it again for this time. I'm your host, Manus. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.